Good evening, everybody. At the onset, let me first wish you a happy new year and a great, my best for the year coming ahead. Welcome back to my startup series, and this is our season two. And those who know me, just to refresh, hey, my name is Govind Kedia. I run Arctic Invent, where we help startups increase their enterprise value and help them to safeguard against copycats. As we kick off this session today, uh, the topic that we are covering today is something which is not on the top of the list of every startup or every startup founder, and but it is very very important for success of a startup, and which is design, right? And Steve Jobs once said that design is not just how it looks, but it and feels like. Design is how it works, really. And getting a product or a service to work in a manner that it works as it is expected is key to the success. And you can get there in many ways. And one of them is design sprints. And our guest today is Deepak Pakre, who has more than 20 years of experience, worked with companies like Amazon, and helped many startups and companies to deliver great design experience. And going to share with us, how, really to think about this topic. It's something which I, in my experience, typically is outsourced to certain agencies, and kind of, founders do not get involved in this. But I think today we are going to learn a lot of it, how to really go about it, what is it, with Deepak. Deepak, why don't you introduce yourself and give audience a bit of insight? What do you do, and what is it, and how do you help?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Govind, and hi everybody on the call. Happy New Year to all of you. And yeah, let's get started with this. My name is Deepak Pakre. I run a design studio called Studio Iterati out of Bangalore. We just recently started. What we offer and specialize in is digital products, service design, and brand design, especially focused on startups. Really, I have had a whole bunch of experience, almost close to 20 years, doing design, UX, product design in large organizations like Yahoo, LinkedIn, Amazon, but also have had stints at startups like. I worked with a travel startup called HolidayIQ.com long time back, and most recently I was working with a fintech startup called Codocard. So I've had some exposure to working with startups, setting up design teams, and then managing the entire end-to-end sort of design process within these startups. So yeah, that's my background. Basically from Mumbai, but been settled in Bangalore for the last 12 years now. Yeah.
Great. Great. Thanks, Deepak, and I welcome you to the discussion. But let's start from the beginning. What role does design play in a startup, and why should startup even care about designs?
Right. I think, in my opinion, I think design plays a pretty disproportionate role in startups, right? Like if you were to compare the role of design in larger organizations, I think larger organizations usually, they take their time to let design sort of mature. And there is something called the design sort of UX maturity model where, design gets ingrained into the organization's sort of DNA, so to speak, over a period of time. But with startups, it's a different story. With startups, I think the benefit is in starting really early with design, right? Like not just kind of bring in design at a time when you're making design as spot interventions, right? Like doing UI fixes or doing the visual design part of your product. The idea is to bring in design much earlier so that you can actually use the full stack capability of design to not just de-risk what the startup is trying to launch in terms of a feature or new product or an entire new service. It de-risks. It allows you to bring in design thinking, the approach of design thinking into the whole mix, and it helps you test early, right? Test your assumptions, hypotheses early, and fail fast, really, right? And that's where the big benefit of design is. The other thing is there's lots happening in a startup, right? It's not just about the product experience. There's also the idea that you want to project the right image to your customers, the value you bring. How do you sort of message that? How do you communicate that to end customers? What's your brand personality like? So all of this is happening more or less at the same time, where you're trying to figure these things out, and design can definitely help in across these different areas, including sort of once the product is established. Because design is never done, right? Once the product is established, there's always, like, you're responding to customer needs and wants, and you're kind of pivoting based on that information. And so UX design plays a crucial role at that point in time, based on the metrics that you're seeing, the things that you want to move the needle on. You bring in design to do that. So I think that's where it plays a bit of a disproportionate role. It kind of brings everything together. It's kind of design kind of brings in cohesion, so to speak, I would say.
Sure. So what I understand is that role of design comes much earlier in the phase of a startup, not at the time when you are really getting into developing your product. It actually starts from when you
Yes.
conceptualize your product or service, and then kind of look at right from your branding till the end how the user experience has to be. So that is what I
Yeah.
understand a bit inside Deepak. And when we talk about design, and especially in the startup communities, and looking at service offerings around, a lot of terms are thrown around, right? User centric, UI, UX, and design thinking, design sprints. And could you please kind of declutter these
Yeah.
jargons for us?
Yeah.
What is it? How should
Yeah.
we really wrap our head around these terms? Because for a startup
Yeah.
founder may not be so familiar with these things.
Right. Yeah, I think I agree with you. There's a lot of design jargon around which needs to be demystified, right? Things can be difficult. Even for me, sometimes it becomes difficult to explain to somebody who's not in the design community as to what I do and what exactly what kind of approaches that I use in doing my work. So I think user-centered design thinking. Let me just explain that a little bit so that you understand the nuances between these two, right? So user-centered design basically cares about whether a specific set of users are using the product the way they find desirable, right? So it cares about desirability, right? And then it kind of uses this similar sort of method around empathy, like empathize with users, test, and then take it from there to build the product out, right? So the whole approach is user centered, meaning it's the focus is only on the users as much. Uh, when you compare that with design thinking, which came in a bit later, right? Like user centered design goes back in time, say in the mid '80s and stuff, where Don Norman with his book the design of everyday things, kind of popularized the idea of user-centered design. Although the approach is much older than that, but I think it got into the mainstream around that time. And so design thinking evolved from that. Like in design thinking brings in a similar focus on users, the end user people, but it also, apart from desirability, it also cares about whether or not the product or the service or the feature is technically feasible, or even economically or business wise, from a business standpoint, whether it is viable or not. So there is a whole big angle of business coming in, where it becomes one of the goals of design thinking, to make sure, apart from being desirable to end users, it's also these two aspects are also sort of taken care of, right? So that's what the difference. And this again was popularized more by IDEO, the large, like the international sort of design firm, who popularized that concept of design thinking. It's more of an approach where you empathize, you iterate, you kind of prototype and then test. So the commonalities between these two is iteration. It's collaborative. Both of these approaches are collaborative. It demands that, or really, it kind of recommends that you bring in cross-functional teams together to solve problems in a collaborative way. So that's basically what user-centered design and design thinking is. Coming to UX is nothing but a way to sort of apply design thinking to real world sort of projects, and sort of use that approach as a way to solve problems. UI also has its own trajectory of how it evolved from the command line sort of interfaces back in the days to more sort of what you see is what you get kind of interfaces, and now it's like evolved to a point where user interfaces are kind of you know and there's a whole bit of visual design going into it, but it's more for UI designers. It's more like like an expertise. It's a vertical sort of expertise where you're focusing on the interface part of it. Right? Sometimes the UX designer and the UI designer could be the same, but they are kind of complementary sort of disciplines.
Sure. So what I understand, Deepak, is that design thinking is like the process where the whole approach or the whole objective is to make the product or service more empathetic to the user, and UI and
That's
UX or UI in the sequence is the kind of a end output of that design thinking, or sometimes it's called a design sprint, what I understand. Um, so what is design sprint? I mean, if I have to now break the design thinking, which I understand is also one more term to add in the list is design sprint. And so what is design sprint in the design thinking concept, and when and where it should be used? Some insights on that would be great.
again, as I said, the design thinking. Sorry. The approach of design thinking, where I mentioned, it's like empathize, uh, prototype, be iterative, empathize, iterate, prototype, and test. Design sprint just crunches that down into a 4-day sort of a process, right? It's the same principles that apply. It's the same approach, but what it does is what would normally take months, the design sprint tries to do it in a matter of a week, right, or lesser. And that's the only difference. Now, the design sprint does have like some sort of prerequisites in terms of the kind of problems that you can bring into a design sprint, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But essentially, design sprint is nothing but a condensed version of what you would normally apply as a design thinking approach.
So are there, like you mentioned about the problems, like design sprints are suited for specific kind of problems. So uh, are there, if these are certain kind of problems, what are they? In what situations? At least listeners and audiences who are here today. Uh, can you kind of give some instances where they should be kind of thinking about design sprints and going for uh, engaging experts, or talking about design sprints?
Right. Like, so for a design sprint to be successful, right? Like, you want to make sure the problems are in the areas of exploration. Like, if you want to explore for opportunities, they need to be significantly important to the business, right? And they should be sizable problems, right? Which are a bit complex, ambiguous, but not too vague also, right? You don't want to bring in something where into this design sprint we're trying to figure out, say, product market fit, right? Because that's quite a broad problem area, and there's lots of other factors going into it. But for a design sprint, what really does make sense is something that is uh, ambiguous, a bit complex, but significantly big enough, right? And it shouldn't be too small also. Like, for instance, if you want to redesign the navigation of your product, right, or an app, we don't want to do a design sprint. I mean, the UX UI designers will figure that out. But bringing in something like, say, for instance, you want to launch a new onboarding flow for corporate users, say for a service like cyclo, like a cycle rental service, or something on the lines of Rapido, for instance, right? So those kind of things. So if you have users already using that service, and you want to sort of bring in something that is for a different cohort of users, and then
Hmm.
sort of solve that, explore that area of opportunity. So you can bring in something like that. right? Where there are other times when you want to do a design sprint. A lot of times, your internal team is not aligned on certain project goals, right? Your tech team or your product team, they find that the product sort of goals are kind of ambiguous. So there's a lot of sense making that needs to, there's a lot of clarity that needs to be driven around some of those goals. So you bring in design sprint, you bring them together. So it's a great tool for driving alignment as well. Apart
Hmm.
from building something like prototyping something and testing it, it's also a great way to sort of help collaboration happen, right? So yeah.
Sure. So what I understand is that what you're kind of telling us that design sprints are not only for app and kind of interfaces, and it's also about much larger business objectives. It could be a business problem, it could be internal communication issues, or not clarity of subjects, right? Now that's a great insight, because I was under the impression that it's always about the looks and feels of things, and certainly
Yeah.
it is something now. It is much largely integrated with the business goals and how to make more empathetic product or service to the end users. Now,
Yeah.
if we are talking about that, it's much larger than that. Of course, in your experience, what kind of participation happen? Does it so when people who are listening to this and going back and thinking about, okay, let's do the some design sprints. Who are the typical participants in such sprints? Is it mandatory to be facilitated by an expert like you, or I can do it on my own? Some bits of insights on that would be great.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I think the success of the design sprint hinges on participation from cross-functional teams, right? Where product engineering, the design basically facilitates the entire thing, and you do need a little bit of facilitation, sort of know-how, like the expertise in that area. How do you sort of run something that is like intense, like with like various different exercises involved in it? It's collaborative, it's a participatory kind of activity, so you do need facilitation for something like this. But what you need to ensure is that you have cross-functional teams, representing their specific functions, whether it's product engineering. And one of the main things is to make sure that the founder or the leader of in a larger organization, maybe there is a product leader or an engineering leader, who is the decider, right? Like, so unless we have somebody at that position who will say, okay, I'm going to be, in the case of a hung jury, so to speak, I'm going to be the decider. We need somebody like that. So unless you have, a commitment from the entire cross-functional team and the decider, whoever that person is, otherwise it doesn't make sense to go into a design sprint unless we have commitment from across the board. Yeah.
Sure. So of course, what you're suggesting is to have kind of key stakeholders, and of course, having
Key
a
stakeholder.
neutral person always helps in such processes. It because it goes in a
Yeah.
negotiation kind of situation. But
Yeah.
now, coming to the design sprint itself, let's break it down a bit. And could you tell us, what makes up like a design sprint? If of course, uh, some insights on that would be great.
Sure, sure. Before I go into the specifics of the design sprint itself, which is the 4-day process, let me talk a little bit about the pre part of it. Like, before you get into the design sprint, there is a fair bit of prep work that you need, where you want to make sure that the participants are informed way in advance about the sprint, because it takes time for people to wrap their head around the fact that, hey, it's a 4-day long thing and I need to carve time out on my calendar and things like that, right? So it makes sense to start early planning, the planning of the design sprint. Reach out to people much earlier, to the extent that you want to maybe even do a bit of a dry run with the decider, like somebody who's in a position who will come into the design sprint. They need to understand a little bit of the backstage, kind of a peek into what's going to happen in the coming week, of the week of the design sprint, right? What are the different things that are going into it? What is it that we're trying to solve using the design sprint? So having a little bit of a heads up, giving them that heads up is crucial. So that is a pre part of it. Bringing in some of the insights from what you already know about your customers, your users, that helps as well. You need not have like done major amount of user research, but already if you already have some material around that, some insights, then that helps a lot. And then of course the post of the design sprint is that how are you going to, after you've kind of done the design sprint, how are you going to use the data that gets generated out of it? What are the next steps of it? Like, and so having a sense of where you want to take the output of the design sprint, having a sense of that is important. So that's where the pre and the post is. But let me go into the design sprint week itself a little bit more in detail. I have a couple of slides that'll be helpful in understanding what goes
Sure.
on in a design sprint.
Sure. No, thanks. Let's
Yeah,
go to the slides, but I also want to encourage. We have already a few questions, Deepak. I'm sure we can take it in the end. Saurabh has a
sure.
question and Ankur has a question already. We'll definitely pick up in the end. In the meantime, I request all the audiences, if they have more questions, please put in. We'll definitely pick each and every questions by the end of it. But Deepak, over to you. Would be really useful to know, what really get into these processes, some step by step guides, and that we can
Sure.
take it away from this session would be great.
Yeah, I think one of the main like advantages, as I mentioned earlier as well, to some extent, is to the design sprint basically just de-risks a launch of a feature or a product or service, right? It kind of just makes sure that it's not too risky to just go out in the market with it. So it kind of vets the whole idea around the feature or product experience internally, as well as it gets validated with customers and users. So I think that's the biggest benefit. One of the other benefits is that it compresses a lot of that effort into just a week's time frame, right? Something that might take months, which is what the design thinking approach is, right? You could apply the same approach across a longer period of time in terms of months, but the design sprint just kind of compresses it into a week for specific kinds of problems. It breaks silos, and it's just fun, right? It just brings people together out of their small screens into a physical space, and just encourages people to sort of contribute towards a common goal in a collaborative environment. So that's basically what it does. So let me quickly go into the step by step of the design week itself. Right. All right. So this is the design sprint for startups. Let's get on with it. So here is a summary. What you're seeing on the screen is a summary of the entire 4 days of the design sprint, right? The first 2 days, assuming that we are starting on a Monday, right, is a workshop setting, right, where you are defining the problem or opportunity area in the first half of Monday. The second half of Monday is about generating lots of ideas for potential solutions, right? So the first half of the day is basically spent on defining the problem area, the opportunity area. There's a lot of collaborative sort of work happening there, and mind you, it's not about just brainstorming and discussing, right? So I'll get to the sort of ground rules of it in a bit, but it's a lot of hands-on collaborative exercises, right? So the first day is define the problem or opportunity area and generate lots of ideas for potential solutions. The second day is then voting and picking out the best solutions. Here again, no discussions. You're basically just doing individual kind of work in terms of coming up with those ideas, and then sort of voting. Each one takes turns to vote on some of those ideas. The fourth thing within the next day is that outlining a storyboard for the prototype. and so on and so forth. So just go into each one of those one by one so that you have a better understanding of it. Wednesdays and Thursdays are basically taking are going out of the workshop setting and doing a lot of the work as a team, as the design team itself. Designing the prototype. Researchers coming in to recruit participants and schedule user tests, and then the testing of the prototype itself, and then coming up with the feedback from the prototype in terms of planning the next steps. So let me just quickly go through it. Just diving deep into each part of this, right? So on Monday, as you define the challenge, there are a couple of approaches to it, and the design sprint lays this out in a very distinct manner, in a step-by-step process, right? The first one is the expert interviews and how might we's, right? And this happens in tandem. Like as the expert interviews are nothing but you're talking to the product leaders, for instance, or the engineering leaders, and getting their insights into how they want to sort of approach this problem, right? And based on that, the rest of the participants do something called the how might we's, which is nothing but taking post-it notes and framing what they hear from the leaders as how might we solve this problem, and then sort of come up with their own thoughts around how to solve that stated problem. And then the next thing is long-term goal, right? The second thing is long-term goal plus sprint questions. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, why do we bring in long-term goals in the mix here? Because you're actually just focusing on a certain smaller sort of a significant problem, but it's like for the 4 day sprint, do we need to sort of brainstorm long-term goals? But it's important. It gives you a sense of where you want to take the experience, evolve that experience, product experience over a period of time. So maybe it's a 2 year goal, like 2 years down the line, what should that product experience be like? So you're kind of envisioning an end state of that product experience, or a service experience for that matter. So that's an optimistic view, right? The long-term goal. This is where my business needs to go. This is where my product experience needs to go. That's the goal. That's the North Star, so to speak. Whereas the sprint questions, which is part of the same sort of exercise, but it takes a slightly different perspective on the long-term goals. It asks the question, can we even do this? So it's a bit on the pessimistic side, right? The long-term goal is optimistic. The sprint questions are basically a bit more pessimistic. And it is framed again as post-it notes. Everybody kind of takes post-it notes and frames them as, can we even achieve this to begin with, right? Can we fix this problem at all? Like, what are some of the challenges that we might face? And so that is kind of presented as a sprint question in the form of, can we? And that these are again written on post-its. And the way you proceed from that point on, where each individual in their individual capacity, sitting and writing these down as they hear the expert interviews, and then later the long-term goals and sprint questions, they're writing it on post-its, and then you go and sort of paste it on the walls, right? And then you vote on each one of those, right? So you're kind of now, from diverging, you're converging to a specific set of how might we's and specific sets of the sprint questions, right? So you do that, and then the next step to that is then kind of taking the entire group. It could be a wall. Along the wall, you kind of or a whiteboard, you map out the entire customer journey, right? For example, I mentioned about this, like a cyclo, which is just basically a made up name that I came up with, which is kind of the cycle rental service. If you were to sort of imagine the entire customer journey, you would start with, say, for instance, a customer walking up to, booking a particular cycle on his app. And then how does that journey proceed? How does that person go and pick up the cycle, use it, leave it wherever he needs to leave it? What happens then? Like at the Does he leave it outside wherever he wants, whatever the destination is going to? Where does he leave it? What happens next? Like how do I pay for some service like that? So that entire sort of mapping exercise is crucial at the stages as well. So that's what happens in the first half of the day, right? The second half of the day is focused on exploring potential solutions, and this goes through these steps where you start with lightning demos. Now, lightning demos is nothing but inspiration, like how others have solved this problem. And this is the only time that you get to open up your laptops in that sort of workshop setting. Until then, you're supposed to be keeping your laptops shut. But here is where you can open up your laptops and look for inspiring examples of how that particular problem may have been solved by others out there, right? Other good benchmarks. And so that lightning demo is one way of starting with inspiration, and then going into the four-part sketching. Four-part sketching is nothing but taking notes from those inspirations. Like it's a gradual sort of progression from the notes which you take based on whatever you found inspiring, and then doodling, like making small sort of doodles around based on the notes that you've taken, and then progressing on to the crazy eights, and then the concept, right? The crazy eights is a very, very interesting, fun exercise where everybody comes together and generates these ideas like really, really rapidly. And that's why it's called crazy eights. Like it just, you kind of create a bunch of ideas. You kind of generate those ideas on a sheet of paper, folded in 8 folds, and kind of variations of those ideas. And then once you're done with that, you kind of put all these things up on the wall and you vote. Again, it's the core of this is to note, stick on the walls, and then vote on those things, right? No discussions, no brainstorming. You're actually working together to create something. You're generating ideas together as a group, and then you're kind of making sure that none of these things, and these are all time box. None of these things get derailed, right? Like the process doesn't get derailed. You just have 4 days within which you want to sort of generate these ideas, vote on them, and converge on something that the team wants to take forward into a prototype. Right? So that's where the first day is. On Tuesday, like the next day, is when you vote on the best solutions. And again, the approach here is to um, create some sort of a voting on and this one, like for the solutions itself, it's not like individual votes, but you're trying to create a heat map of votes. So there is no limitations of how many votes you want to put in there. You're creating a heat map where you're allowed to, you're kind of, or rather, you're kind of encouraged to put as many dots on the ideas as you want, so that you're sort of creating some sort of a heat map on those solutions. And those solutions can be very, very sketchy. They are like all A4 sheets of paper pasted on the wall, and you're going up and then saying, okay, I find this solution interesting, and so I'm going to put a bunch of stickies on this, like these are red dots that you usually use to convey a particular vote on an idea. Post that is when you come to a solution presentation, right? From that heat map, whichever solutions the group has kind of gravitated towards, where the heat map is getting stronger, right? You narrow down on those and you create this solutions presentation where you are taking that early idea to a slightly more detailed sketch, which is kind of a 3-part sketch, right? You're explaining what the concept is, and then you're drawing a few screens or a workflow and describing what's going on there, right? So that's a solution presentation. So each the voted solutions are then presented, right? And there again, there's a straw poll vote, which is basically, again, in the solution presentations, whichever idea, again, there's another level of convergence happening there, where from the solution presentation, you're identifying the strongest ideas that might be, the group might be gravitating towards, right? And then once you have that, you would want to bring in the decider vote, right? You bring in, and at this point is where the CEO of the startup or the product leaders could come in and then say, okay, out of all of these solutions, this is what I believe we should decide to go ahead with in terms of storyboarding and then prototyping, right? So just to give the decider the context, the facilitator can explain the solution that the group has converged on, right? Or a multiple set of solutions that the can converge on. So once that happens, then the decider puts his decider vote, right? Tuesday, second half of the day is when you're doing the user test flow as part of the first step towards storyboarding. I think the idea of the storyboarding is important. Why? Because from the concept sketches, which could be sort of isolated concepts, you want to stitch them together as a user test flow, right? Because that is what ultimately is going to become the storyboard. The storyboard has more details as compared to the user test flow, right? In the user test flow, you're kind of just stitching the whole thing together, and the storyboard then details everything out, right? As to what's happening in each screen of that user journey, that user test flow. So that's what the storyboarding step does, right? Just some pictures of what it looks like when you're inside a design sprint. A lot of hands-on, creative. I wouldn't say creative, but hands-on conceptual work that happens as part of a group, right? And then we come to Wednesday, where the third day of the sprint, where you're prototyping. In this session, there is no need for the leaders to be present, or it's no longer a workshop setting. They can, sort of not attend this. It's all right for them to not attend this. This is basically something that the designers would typically work on based on whatever the group has come out with in terms of a storyboard. Based on the storyboard is when the designers build the high fidelity prototype, right? Once the prototype is done on the same day, in parallel, if there is a researcher on the team, that person goes ahead and finds user testers and schedules those tests, right? And the last day of the sprint is where you're testing the prototype, which is basically what the whole purpose of the design sprint was to begin with, right? So you have now a testable prototype. You run those user tests with at least 5 users, 5 to 8, but yeah, five users is a good number. And then based on whatever your insights from that prototype, you create a test report that captures all the findings for that specific, as an example, right, the onboarding problem for corporate users for the cycle service, right? And those findings can then be laid out in a document, which kind of also sets out the clear next steps beyond that, right? So that's what the overall sprint looks like. It's a 4-day sprint. Some more sort of pictures, and yeah, that's what the sprint looks like. If you have any questions around that, we can discuss that now.
Ankur has a question, and it's also exactly the question I was thinking to ask. And Ankur says, "Hey Deepak, how are you? Hope you're doing well. Wanted to ask which existing Indian solution slash products that you may have used or experienced you consider a good benchmark for a great design and a user experience."
Okay, I have a bunch of them. There's good benchmarks for Indian products and solutions. Yes, I've been using a lot of personal finance tools in the past. Like I've done that. Even now I do it. But one thing that sticks out to my mind is Scriptbox, and then beyond that, I've kind of similar sort of products that I've used in the personal finance space is Goalwise, which is now Neo Money and things like that, right? So some of these I have had personal experience with, right? But that's also because I'm able to sort of uh, compare that with what I have experienced in products that are mainstream banking products, and I believe they have kind of uh, taken it a notch higher in terms of the quality of experience that they provide. Just two examples of it, but yeah, there's a bunch of other very good product experiences that I've come across. Yeah.
Sure, great. Today's last question I have from my end is that how to design provide a moat? I think this is one of the most common questions that startup get to ask by investors. And so, how design can provide moat around the business, and how do you think design can keep on keeping that moat relevant? Some insights on that would be great.
Right. I think as I earlier said as well, like the design capability, if it's a full stack capability that you're bringing into your startup in terms of solving significant problems or opportunity areas, and you're kind of applying the design thinking sort of approach to it in a rigorous manner, in a way that is also sort of becomes a part of the culture of the company, right? That is that will sort of give that mode where you're not just thinking about the end users or your customers, but you're also sort of leveraging the powers of user centered and design and design thinking to also assess the business aspects of your organization, right? Where the feasibility and the viability of what you're trying to put in front of your customers, right? So I think that's what it would do, and I think over a period of time, as it sort of gets entrenched into the company's culture, it provides ways and means to sort of bring about cohesion in terms of what other functions are doing. Are they profitable or not? How are they sort of tying into the core USP of that company, right? Whether it is marketing and sales, there's a lot of design intervention that can help there as well, right? In terms of the brand positioning itself, things like that.
So, I think one of the things that I would like to add on the design mode, and we have a similar experiences with few companies we work with, and interestingly, a lot of you talked about fintech, being a great design. Of course, in India it is not possible, but in US and Europe, what I have seen that outcome of these design sprints have been protected by design patents, and that adds a lot of great moat value to all of these startups as well. So what, in my experience, in kind of look, and now I understand with the design thinking and design sprints, how it actually leads to the IP, a lot of IP that startups generate around these UI UXs, which can be protected under patent laws. In US you can file a design around the entire user experience as well, as a US design. In Europe as well, in India of course, no, you can go for copyrights to kind of have some interesting moat around and register designs of some of these important elements that comes out of such design, inventions, or so to say functions, which come after these
Yeah.
design sprints. So that has been my insight. Now, very interesting question from Saurabh. Hi Deepak, thanks for the insight. Would you approach design thinking differently in a B2B setup, considering that your product buyer and product user may be different with different requirements? Very interesting question, Deepak. What's your take on it?
Right. So yeah, I think the so design thinking is an approach, right? It's quite adaptable. It's adaptable. It's flexible in the way you can deploy it, and you can bring in, irrespective of what domain you are in, you can bring in those problems or those opportunity areas that you want to tap into, and start making sense of it, right? Like use that the power of design to sort of sense making, for sense making and discovery, right? So it is an adaptable sort of approach, right? So when you talk about B2B setup, product buyers and product users may be different, but they are just people who probably have different motivations and different sort of needs and wants, and there is a way to sort of tease that out, like understand specific needs and wants of a particular cohort of users. In that sense, it's a generic sort of approach. And so I think just because you're kind of talking about B2B, it doesn't change the way you approach the problem solving. So it's kind of the approach is adaptable and flexible, as I mentioned. So yeah, so
Great. Thanks, Deepak. Thanks for the insight, and thank you, Ankur, Saurabh, for the questions, and Pawan and Madhav for your messages. Deepak, just before I let you go, how can our audiences find you? Uh, uh, would be a great, if any questions, I'm sure you'll be okay to pick up more questions on
yeah.
the thread or otherwise.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do reach out to me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn, I'll share my profile in the chat window here, and I could sort of take questions or anything that you want to discuss. I'll make myself available there. And yeah, let's connect there and see. We can have some healthy discussions around design thinking and design sprints.
Sure.
And of
Thanks.
course, I'll also put in my, you know, another link here, which will be handy for people wanting to work with us, like the iterati.in, which is our studio iterati, the studio that I run out of Bangalore. So yeah, just go check it out, see what we offer for startups and other companies as well.
Great. Thank you, Deepak. Thank you for sharing so much of valuable insights. The presentation really was really amazing. I think kind of a lot of uh, takeaway that we can use it right away after the session. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for helping me kick off this session. And we wish you all the best and wish Studio Trati the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Govind. Thank you, and
And
yeah, happy to chat more again, and yeah, stay connected.
all right.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you all for attending the session. And of course, do follow Deepak for more knowledge around deep design and design sprints. And please connect with him directly. You can follow me or Arctic Invent page for more updates. We are coming up with more exciting talks like this. We have a great speaker lined up in the coming and this month. So I would love to have you back here and look at the session in live or after the live, and looking forward to connect with you all. Thank you, and look forward to see you in the next live event. Thank you.